This episode is brought to you by Sacred Rites, which provides support, resources, and networks for religion scholars committed to translating their research to a broader audience. You can find more information about their work at sacred-rites.org. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Tara Isabella Burton. Tara Isabella Burton is a theologian and culture critic and the author of Self-Made, Creating Our Identities from Da Vinci to the Kardashians, and Strange Rites, New Religions for a Godless World. She is a regular contributor on religion and culture to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and has lectured and taught seminars at Yale, Hobart and William Smith College, Radford University, and Covenant College. On this episode, we discuss and preview Burton's current book project about the influence of the Western esoteric traditions, from alchemy to Freemasonry to 19th century occult practices like Theosophy and spiritualism, in the development of what we think of as today's scientific progress. You can find her work and writing at taraIsabellaBurton.com. Thank you so much for listening. Dr. Tara Isabella Burton, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm delighted that you're here as well. I'm wondering if you can spend a moment and introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners out there so they know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm Tara Isabella Burton. I wear about a million different hats.
Yes.
I think I go by novelist, theologian, professional beauty and magic investigator. I'm a writer, and in my fiction and in my nonfiction, the question that I'm trying to wrestle with is the relationship between art and God, what it means to for human beings to not just gather, but to create, to imagine, to communicate, particularly, but not exclusively, in verbal language, and how the kind of reality that is reflected or created or co-created or shaped through verbal language exists in dialogue with question mark ultimate reality.
Mm. You have several fiction and nonfiction books out. Tell me a little bit about your writing life.
There's not enough of it, or there's too much of it. I don't. Either way, there's not enough time, is what I mean to say. Um, I go back and forth. I have three novels out. I'm working on a fourth. But before I can dive all into it, I am currently working on my third nonfiction book, which will be published by Forum at some point when I finish it. But it is an intellectual history of magic and modernity, meaning what is often called learned magic, or the Western esoteric tradition, or the Hermetic tradition, which was Francis Yates's designator. And all of my nonfiction work deals with the question of what is the religion of modernity, or what are the metaphysical assumptions, if any, underlining our, and I say our, I mean we in, let's say, the United States in 2026, experience of a life shaped by smartphones, by the algorithmic internet, and increasingly, this has caused a sort of reframe of this book project, by AI. And my first book in this sort of was become a trilogy. Strange Rites, which came out in 2020, was written in 2018-19, was a look at what I call the religiously remixed. So not just the official spiritual but not religious, but people who maybe identified in one religious category but practiced other forms of spiritual life, or who were kind of mixing and matching, whether it was yoga here and tarot there, or walks in the woods and wellness, a kind of bespoke spiritual identity. And I tied this into the broader trend towards bespokeification that the internet, particularly the algorithmic internet, engenders. So your newsfeed is curated for you, and your what you want to watch on Netflix is curated for you. Why shouldn't your religion be curated for you? And I became increasingly interested after writing Strange Rites in the idea that this isn't just a bricolage that we're all doing, but that there's actually some kind of assumption underlying the fact that we could bricolage at all, that reality is something that we can and should make around ourselves in accordance with our needs and wants and desires. And this led to my second book, Self-Made, which is an intellectual history of the idea of self-making and self-fashioning. So looking at the dandies, the celebrity, and the hardworking self-made entrepreneur as two sides of the same coin, roughly from the Renaissance to the present day. And this book that I'm working on now, which is tentatively titled The Great Work, which is a reference to the alchemist's pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone, as well as the fact that this book has taken me many, many more years than I anticipated, um, is a kind of sacred history of the story I told in Self-Made. So looking at this period from the Renaissance to the present day through the lens of these different generations of magicians, self-proclaimed, self-described magicians, esotericists, occultists, who, without necessarily a direct lineage, we're not talking about, we're talking about some secret societies, but we're not talking about, one shadowy secret society through the ages, but we're talking about how these symbols, this rhetoric, the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, the idea of the Philosopher's Stone, the fabled myth a little later of the Rosicrucians, gets picked up by people, initially, I'd say what we now consider scientists, and then later what we'd consider artists, um, who are interested in human self-transcendence, in the idea that human beings can become gods, and in the idea that the mental realm, the change in the mental realm, can transform the physical. That something is going on at the level of ideas that, when properly shaped through a judicious understanding of symbols and correspondences, can kind of trickle down to material reality. And that story sort of starts, well, it starts in 3rd, 4th century Alexandria, but this version of the story starts in sort of the Platonic revival in Renaissance Florence, and takes us through everything from the Rosicrucian scare to the rise of Freemasonry, to the development of 19th century occultism among artists, to the rise of New Thought, to sex magic and Aleister Crowley, through into chaos magic, and ultimately the modern internet, which I treat as a kind of manifestation of the magical tradition, in particular chaos magic.
How did you get into all this stuff? Like, what's the little backstory behind like you finding your way into researching alchemy and Freemasonry and occult practices? What's the story there with your life?
Honestly, I just thought it was interesting. I would just say I am not a Freemason. I am not an alchemist. I always joke I'm only a magician insofar as I'm a novelist, and in no other way. But I did my doctoral thesis on the theology of late 19th century French decadent novels. So the most famous example would be Joris Karl Huysmans' Against Nature, à Rebours. And I was interested in this place and time in history, because this idea of what is artistic creation, what does it mean for an artist to create a character, to create a world, to shape language, was so tied up with these questions of the presence or absence of God, and the presence or absence of God in the industrial world. It, it's a cliche to cite Walter Benjamin's The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, but if everything is reproducible, what is real, and how do we think about what is real? And this time, rather like I would argue our own today, is characterized by revivals of reactionary religious fervor. Huysmans would himself sort of commit to Catholicism after a period of great decadence, but also of massive occult interest. So you had figures like Josephin Péladin or Eliphas Lévy or Oncaus, so the modern tarot as we know it, for example, derives from some of the people writing in this period. A lot of the imagery we associate with the occult, like the Baphomet you see in every horror movie, which comes out of alchemical art by Eliphas Levi. And what interested me about it in my doctoral research is not that like, oh, these people are doing magic. It's that everyone's so bored and lost and curious in this industrializing uh, or this industrialized society, this sort of new transformed Paris where everything feels alien and different, that the same people, or there's an overlap of people who are exploring Catholicism and exploring occultism, that there's some hunger for figuring out this question that is bringing people in dialogue with one another. And that's really traced in another of Huysmans' novels, Là-bas, Down There, which is the study of this sort of occult scene in 1890s Paris. And so I thought it was interesting, and I like many former theater kids, sure, I dabbled in tarot and a little bit of spellcraft as a teenager. I watched Buffy and Charmed, but it wasn't really something that stayed with me. Although I do find the tarot very interesting historically. But as I returned to some of that material when I was writing Self-Made, in this chapter on dandyism and dandyism and occultism, and there's this figure Josephine Péladan, who is not only a magician but kind of treats the art of personality as a form of magic. He has this book called How to Become a Mage that is about sort of internal transformation as a form of magic. And I got really interested in the relationship between art, quote unquote magic, and the occult, and mass media. This fact that all of these figures are also public figures who want to sell books, and someone like Josephine Péladan is yes, he's reviving what he claims to be an old Rosicrucian order, and he is framing himself as the reviver of a lost aristocracy, and also he is trying to get to the press to come to his salons. One of my favorite details, like he invites Sarah Bernhardt, and he basically says, you don't even have to show up, just let's put your name on the program. Like he knows how celebrity culture works. And because one of these sort of tensions within this idea of magic is, you transform people's reality, you transform people's imaginative reality, and that has some kind of concrete results. It got me thinking about magic and mass media. When, if an image goes viral on the internet, regardless of its veracity, you can convince people of a political candidate's fitness or unfitness for office. You can convince people of a certain economic decision they should make, how they vote, whether they sell or buy stocks. And that's going to have, particularly in a democracy and particularly in a capitalist society, material results. You shape people's desires, you shape people's perceptions. And political and economic reality will follow. And so that thesis that in a sense on the internet magic's kind of real in the way that I'm defining it here made me really want to dive into the material. But that's a long way of saying I am not a Freemason. I do not practice magic.
I'd love to do a little preview for listeners about what to expect from this forthcoming book too. I was looking at some of the contents that you're previewing: alchemy, Freemasonry, occult practices like Theosophy. I'd like just a little overview and preview of what listeners can expect as far as content and some of your favorite things in the book.
Sure. So like I said, we go from the Renaissance all the way into the age of the internet. I am most excited. I'm working on these two chapters side by side that I'm most excited about. One about looking at attempts to identify the energy that underlies the universe, and is it in fact just sex, or does erotic desire? And this is something that we see in a lot of Renaissance magicians, Marsilio Ficino, or magicians and theorists of magic. We don't always know what they practiced, but both Ficino and a little later Giordano Bruno treat erotic desire in a very broad sense, not just like a person's sexual desire for another, but a kind of attraction in the universe as the basis of a certain kind of magical power. And I take up that idea and I explore how in the 19th century, there's all these different attempts to find that current, that thing. Is it electricity? Is it evolution? Is it power? Is it, Bergson's élan vital, or is it sex? And I look at two figures, Aleister Crowley, who's a bit better known as the great beast and the most infamous magician of all time, perhaps, who does a lot of sex magic. That's very I don't know if I can how much of a family podcast it is, but where one can charge one's moment of great bliss in order to orient oneself towards one's goal. But also another figure, Pascal Beverly Randolph, an American occultist and self-proclaimed Rosicrucian, who also kind of develops this theory of sex magic, that if you can just like harness your erotic desires and use the moment of sexual congress to fixate on the thing you want, like your desire will get you what you want. And this idea that desire is some kind of magical or mystical force, sure, when you look at it in the context of Crowley's rituals, might seem a little far-fetched, but if you think of it as the thing that the algorithmic internet is driven on, runs on, that what we want kind of changes reality before us, it starts to seem a little less far-fetched as an account of how people work, or how even perhaps the world works.
How do you treat Freemasonry in the book? Because that's something I haven't really talked a whole lot about on this podcast, so it's just kind of like a little gap in what I've discussed here.
So I find Freemason really, really fascinating, and there's a sort of sub thread in my book, which is that at its, I will say, best, a lot of the esoteric or magical tradition comes out of an attempt to figure out how religiously pluralistic societies can coexist, and what sorts of things have to be in order for polity to flourish. And you find, the Hermetic tradition arguably comes out of 3rd, 4th century CE Alexandria, cultural melting pot. You see this again in the rise of Kabbalah, in the Iberian Peninsula, where you get Jews, Muslims, Christians are living side by side, and someone like Raymond Lull is trying to use sort of Kabbalistic, semi-magical practices in order to do evangelism that will allow Jews, Christians, and Muslims to talk to each other. You find it again in the Protestant Reformation, the rise of Rosicrucianism, and finally you find it explicitly in Freemasonry, where Freemasonry is a place that Catholics and Protestants and Jews and everyone else, and especially in a colonial environment too, people from colonizers and the colonized can come together, at least ostensibly, as brothers, as equals, and the official principle is that on which reasonable men can agree. So I'm interested in Freemasonry as not necessarily as a magical phenomenon. In fact, a lot of the magic goes away from the ritual. It's just it's sort of magic light. But this idea that people can strip away from religious doctrine everything that, as a modern person might say, does not serve them, and instead find some kind of base common ground that lets them form a chosen community of affinity that parallels a Christian church, for example, the body of Christ, but does not require certain kinds of truth claims. And is that a model for other forms of free association, or an association that is your primary group identity outside of a church setting? And it, in a sense, Freemasonry is, I think, best understood as the religion of the educated man who believes just enough, and is able to identify himself as such, and the religious symbolism around it, magical, religious, call it what you want, is a way of intensifying that narrative that, we maybe other people believe in the dogma, but we believe in this sort of, as it were, esoteric version.
Mm. Something else I've never talked about in here is Theosophy spiritualism. I'm wondering if you can just give a crash course in what that is, because I know it's in the
Sure.
book. Yeah.
Sure. So for the purposes of this conversation, let's
Yeah.
not talk about like Jacob Boehm's Theosophy. We're talking about 19th century Theosophy. Theosophy comes in the 19th century out of a partnership between a fascinating, mysterious woman of Russian descent, Madame Helena Blavatsky, and an American journalist, Henry Steele Olcott, who she ends up meeting uh, at in Chittenden, Vermont, as he's covering seances there as part of a sort of wider craze of spiritualism. And Blavatsky is a rather mysterious person, has been called a charlatan, has been called many things, but she manages to convince him, and he's a like fraud investigator and investigative journalist, so not the most credulous man, um, that she has been receiving letters and communications with a certain group of uh, hidden masters from, broadly construed, the East, who are directing her actions and teaching her a kind of wisdom that is a kind of syncretic mashup of Hermetic thought and what she presents as Eastern thought, um, uh, both especially Buddhist, but also Hindu, but also through the lens of Blavatsky specifically. And she starts the society, the Theosophical Society, to disseminate these ideas with sort of limited degree of success in the United States. The same kind of clientele that are also interested in spiritualism become interested in theosophy. It's this like she says she's very opposed to spiritualism. She thinks spiritualists have it wrong. It's not ghosts making these sort of sounds, or you're not communicating with spirits. You're actually the true initiate sort of knows how to control these spirits and not be controlled by them. So there's a bit of a sort of hierarchy there. Um, and it's reasonably successful, but what ends up happening in a fascinating twist of fate is that the place it becomes most successful is in fact in India and what was then known as Ceylon, because this reimagined form of East meets West, westernized vision of Eastern religion becomes then popular as a like a countervailing political force to Christian missionary work in the area. So Indian nationalists, including Mahatma Gandhi, who meets Blavatsky and cites her as a major influence and cites Theosophy as a major influence, say like there is an alternative to uh, the sort of Christian narrative hegemony that also can be in dialogue with world religions on this scale. So it sort of becomes this sort of westernized, easternized phenomenon. And to this day, Henry Steele Olcott is still revered as a national hero in Sri Lanka and has like a postage stamp named after him and statues of him. Uh, but uh, so Theosophy then goes on this like long journey after their deaths, where there's a sort of tensions over how much of it takes the sort of Western Hermetic approach and how much becomes more active, more influenced by Hindu and Buddhist thought. But there is this sort of consistent uh, thread throughout that it's always a kind of hermetic take on these texts. So, for example, what is read often and became hugely influential in the 60s counterculture, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is in fact there is no text in, and I think the Pali is the right word there, that is called the Tibetan Work of the Dead. It is a translation and arranging of Tibetan texts that is named after the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which has, by Western scholars, that has as its sort of framing, this is just like the Egyptian corpus, which is of course associated with Hermetic magic because Hermes Trismegistus is sort of ostensibly has this ancient Egyptian lineage. So you have this theosophy is really interesting, not just in its own right, but because it sets the stage for the 20th century Western reception of Eastern religion through a very particular lens of these themes of self-transcendence or becoming godlike or achieving a certain kind of wisdom.
Mm. This is an insanely difficult sounding book to write. Where are you at in the process? How are you doing?
I'm okay. I should be doing more. I'm in the 19th century is where I'm at. Um, it I foolishly thought this would take me a couple of years, and it's taking me, half a decade. But it is, I think the challenge with something like this is it is a generalist book. It is not an academic book, and it's certainly like each of these chapters could be a doctoral thesis. And so there's that negotiation of wanting to write something readable, and in my case, really wanting to link this back to 2026, which is to say, link this back to the algorithmic internet, link this back to approaches to AI and transhumanism, approaches to what does the world of imagination and symbols mean when we can track archetypes, sort of, we can see archetypes form through like an LLM's generative writing, where you perhaps readers have already kind of come across some great reporting on what sort of appear to be LLM deities that people think that they're evoking when certain forms of language get generated and are associated with other things, that are associated with other symbols or images, such that the people prompting them come to believe they're talking to some kind of ancient god. Um, and so the challenge for me is getting all of this material down, not letting all this material blow my mind too much, and finding a smooth way to kind of keep this as a etiology of the metaphysical assumptions underlining the internet, rather than trying to make it here is a complete history of the entire Western esoteric tradition, which has been done, and done by people with a lot more time and knowledge and skill than I have.
I'm looking forward to it. Is it a 2027 book, do you think?
One would hope. Um, or 2028. I would like to have a first draft to my wonderful editor, who has been very patient with me, by the end of this year.
Wonderful. I know that you are working on several other projects as well. I know you have a Templeton supported foundation project called Can Beauty Save the World? Do you want to tell listeners a little bit about that and where they can find that project?
Absolutely. And it's also nicely refreshing as a sort of follow on to the Magic Project. I joke that the Magic Project's about advertisement and advertising, and then the Beauty Project will be about actual beauty. But basically, I'm the co-director. The PI on the project is my friend and colleague, the sociologist Brandon Vaidyanathan at Catholic University of America, and we would like to figure out whether collective shared experiences of beauty, both aesthetic uh, and natural, are whether they open people up to a sense of the transcendent, and that there's something real out there, whether or not that sense of reality has any propositional content, and whether that sense leads to stronger, better, deeper social cohesion. So, beauty as a kind of vehicle towards a more realist sense of the world, and towards greater human connection. Now, I'm not a sociologist who has to sort of do studies on. We have a Gallup poll that we've commissioned, a Gallup study, and we have other data that we're forming. As a non-social scientist, I can just say, like, I think the answer is clearly yes, anecdotally. But we have to we will be taking we're taking basically a two-pronged approach. So there's this national level data, and global data, I should say, and then also I'm doing field reporting at various sites of beauty and collective effervescence. I spent earlier this year, I was at the Carnival in Venice, where I've been going before this project for a decade as a participant, um, dressing in historical costume, and gathering in this sort of very close-knit intentional community in Venice every year. I'm training with an immersive theater company, experimental theater company called Dzieci, which is Polish for children, who does a lot of theater that explores the boundary between theatrical performance and religious ritual. And I just got back from something called Vibe Camp, which I don't quite know how to describe it, except that it is the only place where there's theater games, there's clown games, there's singing sea shanties, there's ceremonial magic workshops, and there was a midnight mass in the woods at a chapel that was built by the participants over the course of 3 days. So it's a sort of, it is which is a long way of saying it's basically an emergent social group that arose out of pandemic era Twitter, largely in rationalist or rationalist adjacent, tech adjacent communities with a strong interest in the arts, and beauty more broadly. And then this annual festival, this was the fifth of them, serves as a kind of container for people to experiment to basically build whatever they want. So what happens when you create a space for beauty and the tools for people to make it? How does that transform people's lives?
Mm. What have you enjoyed about the Sacred Rites project and working with your cohort in the Templeton working group?
It's been really fantastic. I got some really good feedback from people when I shared my chapter, and I think what's been very helpful for me is thinking about the Western esoteric tradition, uh, not just as a kind of historical phenomenon, but like as a discrete entity within the study of religions. And so having a kind of study of religions framework on it has helped me to ask different questions and ask questions about the sort of social questions or political questions or questions of self and identity that you might ask of any other faith tradition of something that is maybe not often looked at with that lens. And so that's been enormously generative.
Wonderful. Where can people find you if they want to follow along with your variety of projects and support your work?
So I am on Substack at The Lost Word, thelostword.substack.com, or you can find me at my website, taraIsabellaBurton.com.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Tara Isabella Burton, thank you so much for coming on Classical Ideas and hanging out. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much. It was a delight.